My name is Travis Reynolds. I'm the youth and family pastor here, so I'm glad you're here. You may have to adjust your heads a little bit. You're used to looking at the ground floor, and now I'm up here. Just to give you an update, Tony Plummer, if you were here the last couple weeks, our pastor injured his knee. And it's not important how, but he injured his knee. And the last 2 weeks, he's been preaching, but then this week, last Sunday he was preaching. He was like, my mouth was so sore. I had this tooth that's killing me. He had the tooth pulled on Tuesday, and by Friday they were doing minor oral surgery for what's known as a dry socket. Anybody? Yeah. I don't know what it is, but it's gross, and it's painful. So he is still hurting pretty bad from that, so he can neither walk nor talk is where we're at with Tony. So I don't know why that's funny, but it is kind of funny. So we're going to pray for him this morning. So Father, thank you for taking care of this church, and I know that with what you have planned for this body of believers, it makes sense that Satan would attack. And I pray for Tony Plummer that you would heal his body, and that even right now, you'd take away the pain that's going on in his mouth, that you would restore strength to his knee. But even more so, God, I pray that you would give him peace in his heart, give him such a clear assurance of your presence that he doesn't doubt what you're calling him to do. Give him a resolve to press forward as he leads us, as he follows you. And thank you for this church, that we come alongside each other. I know he's not the only one that's hurting physically or in any other way. So let us come alongside of each other and to be the body of Christ, to be the hands and feet, to be the heart that cares. And thank you for giving us each other this community of grace. Amen. All right. So also, I want to say this, since I'm up here, I'm going to brag about it. This last Wednesday night, we had something called Who Done It. Raise your hand if you were part of Who Done It. Participant, helper. If you look around here, there was a ton of people. There was over, depending on who counted, it was 275 or 307. So it was a lot. It was a lot of people, about 220 students between 5 different churches. Who Done It's just a big game of Clue, and we took 19 different rooms on our campus, and Jonathan was Bob Ross, and Lisa was the Grinch, and Tony was damaged, so he wasn't here. But we had people all over the campus who were doing different things, and the point of it is we have a lot of fun, then we come back in here, and we get to share the gospel. So at this church on Wednesday night, there's 220 kids who got to hear the gospel presented from a man in a pumpkin suit. So it was pretty great. And then they went out and just destroyed 40 pizzas in about 3 minutes. So thank you for being a church that supports that, and I love getting to do ministry to students here. And we are meeting again on Wednesday night, by the way, because Tuesday is Halloween, and so middle school and high school is on Wednesday night this week, if that applies to your families. So Who Done It was Wednesday. Thursday, we spent all day cleaning up, and that was a task, man, I'm telling you. You might see some face paint on the walls, but that's not important. And then Friday, I took my daughter to a tour of University of Florida. And it's the first, don't clap too hard, it's all right. You can clap for my daughter, but UF is okay. So it was a beautiful school, and we were the parade, gosh, I'm tired. Tour started at 11, and about 1 o'clock, we were learning about meal plans and whatnot. And I get a text from Lisa that says, hey, Tony's not well. We might need you to preach on Sunday. Then it said, we will definitely need you to preach on Sunday. And, we're in mid-tour, and I'm like, okay. Here we are 2 days later, and we're up here. So I want you to know what happened while we're there. This is so interesting to me how God sets this stuff up. Because as you're walking around University of Florida, they do a great job, honestly, of presenting why you should go to their school. They're a pretty elite institution, and so they should be good at telling you why you should send your senior high school there next year. But it was interesting what they were selling. Because what we're going to learn today is that you and I are designed to put on display and to declare the glory and greatness of God. That's the whole reason why you and I exist. Whatever you do is for that purpose. Make money however it is you make money, lead your family, but do all those things in such a way that when people look at your life, when they hear your voice, they see you putting on display and they hear you declaring how great and glorious and good God is. That's not what they were advertising at UF. That's not unique to them. There's no state university. We're going to go to a tour of UCF next weekend, which is preferable, to say the least. And I'll tell you what they sold. They're going to be selling the same thing. They're going to be selling the same thing at any state university. Here's how much money you can make when you leave. UF was like, we are the most elite institution. We are number 2 in the country at salary for graduates, which is a good sell. I mean, that's a good portion of why you're going to college. And positions. We have higher level positions of influence than any other school in Florida. So money, power. We have the most diverse campus. We are the most tolerant people. There's that. You have health. We care about your holistic health and service. We emphasize service at our school. And at one point, they had you like staring at a statue of an alligator making weird chomping movements, and you're like, are we all doing this together? Is that a thing? And then social experience, and Gainesville is a college town, so his point was, this town is made for you. So your social life is about to blow up. You don't know how good it's about to get when you get here. And, I mean, going to school to party is nothing new, but it was a very veiled reference to that. Your social life is about to get pretty huge. All of that prepares you to make a living, to have a life, but not to make a life, Those are different things. If you want to have a life that's lived with purpose and meaning, these don't get you there. They do briefly. Serving makes you feel good, and that was their point. How much better the mental health is of our students because of our emphasis on serving. But it's still a selfish enterprise. Serving others makes me feel good. So even service has a selfish bent to it. When God tells us to serve, it brings him glory. And through bringing him glory, we find satisfaction, because that's your whole life. There was nothing about this that gave you anything nothing they were selling was of eternal value. And that's not why, I had no expectations, let me say, of that being the case when we showed up. But it was really interesting to hear how explicit it was. And then when we look at the characters in our story today in the book of Daniel, you're going to see when these young men get shipped off to Babylon University, they're going to have the same experience. So if you go to Daniel chapter 1, you'll see where this starts. When you think of the book of Daniel, there's probably 2 main stories you think of. Daniel the Lion's Den, the stories that you teach your 2-year-old because they're fun to tell. And they're fun to tell when you're 44. So the story of Daniel the Lion's Den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. So that's the one we're going to go to today. But I want you to get introduced to these characters first, because this is going to start off reading like a news story from yesterday when a country overwhelms the nation of Israel, kidnaps certain members that they want, and tries to make them assimilate them as part of their own land. That's what Babylon does to Israel. And these are 4 of the guys that get picked out. In fact, in Daniel chapter 1, verse 4, it describes what kind of young men they were looking for. Youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So this is what they want. You need to be young, handsome, smart, able to learn, and we're going to take you from Hebrew to Babylonian. Chaldean is just another word for Babylonian, by the way. My son is actually in 6th grade, and he's at Venice Middle School, and he was learning like ancient empires, and we were studying about this, and he's like, those are the people in the Old Testament. I was like, yeah, history in Old Testament. That's a real thing, by the way, that crosses over. And the Chaldeans are the same as the Babylonians, and so that's one of the things we were talking about. So if you're in Babylon, you learn the Chaldean language. And it's okay. They're trying to shift you from the literature. If you look in the next verse, verse 5, the king assigned them a daily portion of food that the king ate, the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of the time, they were to stand before the king. So you learn their literature, you learn their language. So we're going to take you from Hebrew to Chaldean. We're going to take you from Moses to Gilgamesh. And honestly, you can do that. There's nothing that's sinful about learning about another culture, about living in another land. And the next part, they shifted even more. Among these young men, verse 6, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them these names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah, Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, Azariah, Abednego. He changed their names. They're trying to shift their identity from Hebrew, Jewish, to Babylonian, Chaldean. We will fully indoctrinate you to be Babylonian. That's the goal here. You got to be careful who you listen to, because you have to know, and this is the part of the conversation we were having Friday at Gainesville. You have to know who you are before you show up on that campus. You have to know who you worship, otherwise they will tell you. And this isn't unique to 17-year-olds. All of us have voices screaming at us all the time, and they're really good at knowing what you like, how you prefer to hear it. Those algorithms are so well curated. For them, it might be on Snapchat and Instagram, and you, it might be on Facebook. It's working either way. And that's why you've seen advertisements on the internet that you didn't even know you wanted that item until you saw it, and you're like, how did they know? These algorithms are so dumb, but I'm also going to buy it. So now you own a crock pot that, even if you use it, that's great. It's not a bad thing. Just understand, you have a lot of voices trying to influence you to do certain things all the time. No different for them. They changed their name. And it was interesting how they changed their name. Daniel means God is his judge. Belshazzar means Bel's prince. Bel is Baal. It's the demonic god. So it's like changing your name from Christian to Satan's prince. It's a drastic shift. But you know what? Call me whatever you want. I know who I am. Literally, they're being called names and given names. Oh, there's no sin in being called a different name. Let's go. You can call me whatever you want. Hananiah means God is favored. His name was switched to Shadrach, which means the great scribe. Remember, these guys were good. They were good at their jobs, and so apparently he was an excellent scribe. Easy name. Mishael means who is what God is, which I think is such a cool name because the answer to Mishael is Yahweh. Mishael means who is what God is. Yahweh means I am that I am. So who is what God is? I am. And his name was switched to Meshach, which means guest of the king. Azariah means Yahweh is a helper. This is such a drastic shift. It's like the Daniel one. God is my helper to servant of the shining one Nebo. It's about God. Now my name is associated with this pagan god. They're trying to shift their entire identity. And you might have watched this happen with your kids, where there is a culture that is pushing so hard on them that you can, and I see it all the time, where you can see them, they start to shift. You start to see it with yourself. And you feel the influences that come in. You're like, I didn't used to care about this, but now I'm starting to not just like things that I didn't like before, I'm starting to hate things that I didn't hate before. And you start to have to consider, what voices am I listening to that it made me start to feel these feelings that aren't okay? And trying to be honest enough with yourself. These guys knew who they were before they showed up. But they still showed up. And you know what? They did a really good job for a kingdom that was pretty messed up. They were successful. Skip over to the end of chapter 2. This book is a great read, by the way. So if you just want good stories, all of chapter 2 is about this crazy dream that Nebuchadnezzar had about the statue that has like clay and iron and bronze and silver and gold. Each one represents a different kingdom that's going to take over Israel. It's going to take over the known world at the time. And Babylon was the gold one. So he's so thankful for Daniel interpreting this dream. And listen, these four were together the whole time. There was a point where he asked Daniel to interpret this dream, and Daniel goes back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's like, hey, will you guys pray for me? I'm supposed to interpret a dream, and if I get it wrong, I die. So I'm going to need some prayer. That's a good time to ask for prayer from your buddies, by the way. So if you're ever in a situation where you might die if you get it wrong, you guys just send out a text. Let him pray for you. And he does. He gets it right. And then look at verse 46. The king is so happy about this. King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you to have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the whole prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. He got a promotion, and Nebuchadnezzar starts praising God. There's a great quote by Matthew Henry. He says, note that strong convictions often come short of a sound conversion. Many a man has owned the absurdity and dangerousness of sin and has gone on with it anyways. This is where Nebuchadnezzar's at now. He's going to keep on getting hit with the 2x4 by God. And eventually he's going to get there, but it's going to take several. This is one of them. He has the opportunity. He acknowledges that God is really powerful. And in the first verse of the next chapter, he's going to build a 90-foot golden statue. It's like, oh, I get the point of that dream. Instead of saying, hey, God can crush all of your statues, he says, I just need to build a bigger statue. That's so good to know. No, that's not the point. But let me say this before we skip to the giant golden statue. Look at the last verse of chapter 2. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court. Can I just say, this isn't the point of the message, but I'm just going to give you a little piece inside of it. Adult friendships are hard. These guys were together and they needed each other. You need people around you who you can stand up with when life gets hard. And when one of you does well, bring the others with you. And so when Daniel did this thing that got promoted because these boys prayed for him that it would succeed, and then it does, he brings his boys with him and says, hey, we're going through this together. And they locked arms and they went through these stories together. And I love, love, love that part of this book. Because there's no record that they even knew each other before they showed up. They were just plucked out of their different parts of Israel, but now they're together and they're bonded. And you never hear Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's name outside of each other, which makes me wonder. I don't know how we're supposed to address them in heaven, and we won't be the first ones to get there, but I don't know if you're supposed to, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, or it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but I'm sure they'll be cool with it, but I'm curious how that goes. Daniel's pretty clear Daniel. He gets renamed Belshazzar, but this book is called Daniel, so he gets his original name. And probably what their mom called them, I guess, which I'm going to go with that one. I just realized that. Anyways, always go with what their mom called. King Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 60 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. If you don't know your cubit conversion very well, 60 by 6 is 90 feet by 9 feet. A cubit is about 18 inches. So a 90-foot tall golden statue, there's had to be some, gold isn't quite that sturdy, so they had to put some stabilizers in there, but you have a giant gold statue, and who's going to question that after that weird dream he had? Here's what you're supposed to do. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to all the satraps, prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, all the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image of the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Get all the important people. And these are all the important people. The satraps, the leaders of regions, like the governors. The administration, the military chiefs, the governors, the civil administrators, the counselors, the lawyers, the judges. It's what any political deal where you want everybody to do your thing. You gather all your influential folks, all the influencers and celebrities and whatever, and you say, hey, look, if we're bowing down, you should too. And more importantly, if you don't bow down, these are the people who will notice. So the whole everybody else is doing it is thousands of years old. And verse 3. Then that long list of people and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So we're establishing they're all standing, and here's what they're supposed to do. Verse 4. The herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of," get used to this list. They say this list a lot. "When you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." Okay, let's just stop there before we read what's next. If they just say fall down before this statue, you might have an out. But what does it say after fall? You have to fall down and what? Worship. Eesh. That's like 1 and 2 of the 10 Commandments, right? You can have no other gods, and you can't bow down before any other idols. So I don't want to do that. Well, here's what happens if you don't. Check out verse 6. "Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." So your cue is the music's about to play. And when the music plays, you bow down in worship of this thing. It's a party atmosphere. They didn't have recorded music. The only time you heard music is when somebody was actually playing it in front of you. So it's kind of a big deal. You get everybody together. You have loud music playing. You have something really cool to look at. It's a well set up environment. And music has always been a design to connect people. It's why, honestly, God designed it that way. That's not an accident. It's not a bad thing. That's why this works on a Sunday morning. It's why we're able to proclaim together about the holiness of God in song. And it hits differently than if we just read it. It's why they're singing in heaven. There's music in heaven. Music is supposed to do this. But just like sexuality was created to bring an intimacy in a relationship in a very specific way. But humans in sin have messed it up and perverted it to be something that can break your very soul. The same thing is true of music. It's designed to point us higher to see who God is, to be able to identify with emotions that we feel that we can bring before God with a broken heart, with a celebration. We all know that. It's why breakup songs pick an artist, and they're almost like 3/4 of them are breakup songs. It's why Adele, Olivia Rodrigo, and Taylor Swift have made billions of dollars. And they work for a reason, because when you feel that feeling and you can hear a song that identifies that feeling, like, yeah, I know that. Music is supposed to work like that. So you have to be careful how you use it, because if you're not careful, it can be used to bring your attention towards something evil. There's a whole concert coming up on Halloween. I won't mention the name of the artist, but he has a song called Unholy, and there's a whole unholy festival in Australia on Halloween where you can celebrate unholy. So imagine who shows up to that. It's literally this. It is celebrating being apart from God. It still happens. This is today's news happening. Only they don't light you on fire if you don't show up. So we're to be blessed for that. You know what happens when somebody says, bow down to this or we light you on fire? Therefore, in verse 7, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every other kind of music, all the peoples, nations, languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. That's not surprising, right? I mean, you hear the music. It's kind of a cool environment because everybody's into it. You know, they asked Hitler one time, what role does music play in politics? And Hitler's response was, music is politics. He would play these operas by Wagner, and who was just a rabid anti-Semitic guy himself. And he believed in the Superman who was going to rise up and take over the world. And he arranged it, and he was a good writer of music. And so he put that music towards getting you behind this idea. And so everybody just gets into it because there's a momentum around it. And you're like, I guess this is what we're doing. Everybody bows. Now, if you see, by the way, do you like it when people demand that you worship? Is that really worship if somebody demands it of you under a threat of death? Like, worship, by its very nature, has to be a choice. If somebody compels you to do it, it's simply an action. It's not actually worship. It's like, I remember being at this one youth ministry conference, and I don't think the band had any kind of malicious intent. This is probably more personal reflection that I'm just sharing with you, but I don't like it when worship bands demand that you raise your hands. It's like, everybody raise their hands, which is fine. Like, you can say that, but then if people don't, that's okay too. And so when people didn't, they called you out, like, hey, those hands aren't raised. Let's put them up, let's put them up, let's put them up. Everybody, if you see somebody down with their hands not raised, tell them to raise them up. And I'm like, well, now I'm definitely not raising my hands. That's not how worship works. Which is kind of like, by the way, if you've ever wondered, why don't they tell us this, like when to stand and when to sit? Some churches do that, and that's fine. But it's kind of the same idea that if you worship Jesus better sitting down and singing, that's totally cool. And if you want to stand and sing songs, that's fine as well. That's how we do it here. Just for that reason, I'm telling people to raise your hands. That's for robbers and DJs. We don't do that here. So, look at verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Maliciously. They accused them with the intent of harming them. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. This is that moment where, you know that moment if you have several kids, like where the older kid will come to you and be like, hey, remember when you said that we were supposed to do the dishes and mow the lawn? Do you remember when you said that? Do you remember what was said to happen if we didn't do that? Do you remember that? Because I did it, but you know who didn't do it? Was my brother. And I think it's really important that you know that the thing that you said should be implemented here. So this is that moment, except they were evil and wrong. So there are certain Jews, in verse 12, that you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. Do you see their little list of accusations? They pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods. They don't even worship the golden image that you set up. All three things that he explicitly told them you have to do. They're like, these three, don't do any of them. And what do you think his response is? Not surprisingly, Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage. That's intense. Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. And I just want to say here, these three men had value to Nebuchadnezzar. He's king of Babylon. He doesn't know everybody, but he knows these three guys. And he needs them. They're good at what they do. Otherwise, he would have just immediately thrown them into the fire. There's no reason to have a conversation with these guys. They did the thing he told them not to do, or you get thrown into the fire. You did the thing, fire. If he doesn't know who these dudes are, they get thrown to the fire. The fact that he brings them in, he's so angry because I think he's angry because he knows these guys. He's like, what, those guys? They've been so loyal. What? Not them. And he gives them another chance. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden idol I have set up?" And they don't answer. Is it true? This is like Jesus when he's accused by Pilate. Are you really the Son of God? Where is your kingdom? And Jesus stands silently. And he's like, "Don't you know I have the power to condemn you?" Pilate doesn't want to do it. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want to do it. So Nebuchadnezzar just kind of skips to the end. He says, verse 15, "Now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God that will save you from my hands?" This is that moment where you're like, you have, logically, he's in a pretty sound place. This makes sense. Nobody can save you. And part of that is a reflection, like a little projection of himself. He's like, I know my God couldn't save me. And your God can't either. Like, we're all on the same page, right? Like, we're worshiping gods that aren't real. So God can't save you when I throw you into a fire. Please just do the thing. Just bow down. It's not a big deal. And you can argue in your head, I can see having that conversation, like, listen, if I know I'm not bowing in my heart, I'm just bowing with my body. But you know that's wrong. But when the consequence is that heavy, I would struggle. These guys, not so much. They did not struggle like I would. Look at verse 17. If this be so. I'm sorry, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king. Now, we don't know which one said this. Again, more questions for heaven. Because maybe they all had this synced up and they all said it. Because it said they all three said it. But chances are, one just spoke them back. It doesn't matter. Anyways, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." Which is, if that alone is a pretty bold take. You start off to the king of Babylon with, "We don't really need to answer you." "If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up." I don't know if this is said in a really authoritative way or a really sarcastic way, but "O Nebuchadnezzar" sounds different than "O Nebuchadnezzar." Either way it works. I like to think it's a sarcastic version, but when you come off with this and you say, our God will save us, or our God can save us, and he will save us. But even if he doesn't save us, we will never bow down to you or any statue you put up. Which, how beautifully honest is that assessment? Our God can save us and will save us, but even if he doesn't save us, he's going to save us. We're never bowing down to you. And it's such a respectful, honest, straightforward tone. It's just very matter of fact. These are the only words we get from these guys. It's been their life the whole time. They have been displaying the glory of God. And this is their moment to declare it. Our God will save us. He can save us. And if he doesn't save us, we're still never bowing down. Imagine having that kind of resolve. Being so sure of what you know to be true about who God is to you. Not in general, not that you know a lot about God, but he's so true to you because you have a personal relationship with the God of the Bible who came down and died for you and rose from the dead. That hadn't happened yet for them, but that's the God they're worshiping. That's the God that we worship here on a Sunday morning. So when we say our God can save us and he will save us, because that is true. Because right now, there are people around the world who the axe does fall and the fire does burn. There was a guy, John Wycliffe, who translated the Bible from Latin to English, and they were trying to martyr him for it, but he died of a stroke before they could martyr him for it. That idea went so viral at that time. People were so amazed by getting the Bible in their language. It went everywhere. And people who were found with an English Bible were burned at the stake with the Wycliffe Bible around their neck. And they would be singing songs to God as they burned. It went so far that they thought, maybe if we dig John Wycliffe's dead body back up 43 years after he died. So, he died in 1980, and they're digging him up today to light him on fire so they can re-burn him at the stake, because maybe everybody will get how serious this is, which is a pretty desperate move if you're at that place. And it didn't work because we're all reading English Bibles. When you know what is true, you stand up for it. And this is where it's at. I don't want to make any guarantees, but you're probably not going to ever have to choose whether to bow down to a statue or get lit on fire. Most of us are going to have to face everybody else is gossiping. This is not a high school thing. This is a human thing. They gossip at school. You gossip at work. It happens in your family. You're like, do I participate in this or do I go? Do I laugh at that joke? Do I look at that website? When they say, hey, you got to check this video out, you see what it is. You're like, no, I'm not watching that. Or do you lean in and be like, okay, whatever, that's weird. I'll bow down, but not in my heart. I'll watch it, but I'm not going to pay attention. Where do you go? Where do you go in your heart with that stuff? Well, if I turn this song off, I know I shouldn't listen to this song, but because I know where it takes my mind. But if I turn it off, everybody's going to think it's weird. These are human things. And most of it's that level of stuff. There's a whole lot of countries where it's much more real to this. In ours, it's much more about feeling awkward and uncomfortable than being physically violated like these men were. And so they tell him straight out. And how do you think he responds when the answer is, yeah, we're never doing that? There's nothing you could say. Well, then Nebuchadnezzar, verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. And this has to come through better in Aramaic. The expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I bet it was. You ever have the expression of your face change when your kids say, yeah, I'm never doing that? It's like, ooh, that's not how this works. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. I can see making a furnace 7 times bigger, but I'm not sure you make it 7 times hotter. And by the way, I thought about this a lot. If you're trying to really torture somebody, you don't want to heat it up because that kills them faster. You want to cool it down to about half the temperature it was before and then just let them cook for a while. But I probably spent too much time thinking about that. We had a lot of whodunit talk this week. That's not going to be one of our rooms, don't worry. So he orders some of his mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men were bound in their cloaks, tunics, hats, and other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. He was so angry, just as fast as you can get them in there. It's lit super hot, but because the king's order in 22 was urgent and the furnace was overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I just want to say, we could spend a whole sermon on verse 22, because the idea that the very tool that is used to make sure that the followers of Christ suffer is the very tool that destroys those who are trying to implement the suffering. There's a lot culturally that could be said about that. Because the men who take the martyrs to their death die, and the martyrs will live. Verse 23. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. The end. Wouldn't that make sense? Because that's how the story should go. It should go that, man, those guys died. That was really harsh. But then when they threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a burning furnace, they died. And that was really sad, but good for them for standing up for what they knew to be true. And you know what? On the other side, God is going to raise them up and they're going to get to live. I can't wait to see them in heaven and just be so thankful for God's faithfulness to them and to be able to tell them about that. Because when you get thrown in a fire, you die. Unless you don't. And when you don't, Verse 24, the king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. That seems like the right word. King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. But I see 4 men unbound. That should astonish you. If you had a marshmallow on the end of your stick at a bonfire, and you look down at the end of the bonfire stick and there's 2 marshmallows, you'd be like, this is weird. I am astonished at what's happening with my marshmallows. How much more if you are, these guys are, not only are they, not only did you throw them in there, but it looks like they're not dead. He says, I see 4 men unbound walking around in the midst of the fire. They're not hurt. The appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. It would be weird if there was just 4 men, but they were all burning. You're like, did we forget about a guy? And then the fact that they're walking around, if there was just 3 men walking around, you'd be like, this is super strange, and I'm astonished. Now 4 men unbound. Like, okay, so did they have to untie the ropes, or did the ropes burn but nothing else did? And again, I want to ask, like, how does that feel? How does that feel when you're in a fire? Can you breathe? Like, were you supposed to be able to breathe? Because like all the oxygen's taken up by the fire. So are you able to breathe while you're in there? And it's like asking Peter when you walked on water, were your feet wet? Like you're on the water, but you're on the water. So like it would make sense, right? How does that feel when you're in it? How does that feel when you're in the fire? And was Jesus there when you showed up, or did he show up after you got thrown in? And was Meshach like, whoa, check it out. Like, wait, I'm talking and I'm in a fire. Fascinating. I am astonished. Listen to how quickly Nebuchadnezzar changes his perspective. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. Why didn't he call the 4th guy? He saw a 4th guy. He just didn't know his name, I guess. But there's every reason to think that that is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, the angel of the Lord who showed up to Rahab, who showed up to Joshua, who showed up to Abraham, who showed up to Hagar. You get these little glimpses of the capital T angel of the Lord who shows up. And once again, in the middle of what should be their death is the most glorious moment of their life. And they rise again on the other side. And what you'll find out is that they rescue their entire people through their death and resurrection. It's the story that resonates with every hero's journey. It's why Marvel movies work and why Frozen worked. Because every time that they die, you find out they're not really dead. They come back to life, and then they live to save their people forever. And there's something about that. I don't care how pagan you are, when that tuning fork resonates with your soul, and you're like, yeah, that's not true. It ought to be. But it is. Because it is. Because there's an empty cross. That happened. And we get to be a part of it. And that's why we worship. And so we sing those songs. Because, go check out verse 15. Look at the end of verse 15. Remember when Nebuchadnezzar just said, but if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? He just answered his own question. Verse 26. Servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. That God is not Yahweh, it's just the generic Elah God, because he doesn't know who God is yet. He doesn't know who Yahweh is. He just knows that whatever God they're about can actually do stuff. My God cannot. We just worship because it feels better than not worshiping, because everybody's a worshiper. Like, you're made to worship. I don't care what you came in here thinking. You were designed to worship God or your own thing. You're bowing down to something, and you will become like what you worship. And as we worship God, as we worship Jesus, we find out that we live our lives displaying with our lives and declaring with our mouth how great, glorious, and good he is. And then your life has meaning. Your life has purpose. It's what happened with these three. And it turns even better because verse 27, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Have you ever opened up a grill before, and then you know where I'm headed? You realize I got too close to the fire, and I realize that when this patch of hair is gone, or you go and you don't have any more eyebrows, oh, what happened? It's been a while, but I got them back. And that happens just because you get too close to a grill. If you're in the furnace and your hair isn't singed, your clothes don't even smell like smoke. You go to a friend's bonfire, that you smell like that. I don't care how many showers you take, it's sticking for a couple days. They didn't even smell like smoke. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own." You see who just got the praise for their obedience? You know what he didn't just say? Wow, wow, wow. These three are amazing at avoiding fire. Did you see how flame retardant their bodies are? I don't know what they did, but wow. Of course not, because that's crazy. It's crazy to say, wow, did you hear how good Joshua and his armies are at yelling? Because those walls fell right down. We got to learn how to yell like that. No, obviously not. You see stuff like this, and you praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And God gets praise for their radical faith, for their radical obedience. And that's the sweet spot of life. And maybe it just means that you don't use the same words that your family or your coworkers use. And they're like, hey, what's your deal? Why don't you use that? And you're like, I'm just trying to live a life that honors Jesus. And they're like, that's weird. I know. And I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to honor God. And you start to help them to ask questions because you're living life in a different way. Nebuchadnezzar way overcorrects in this next verse, but I like where his heart's at. He says, verse 29, "Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." That feels like you went too far the other way. At some point, if that God who rescues, if you don't worship him, we're going to tear your arms off. That's not how this is supposed to work. And then the boys get a promotion. Verse 30, the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon, which means they kept working for him. I don't know that they had a choice, but on some level, what else is he going to do to you? He already tried burning you alive and it didn't work. So when your boss threatens you, you're like, I think I'm all right. So they realize we're going to continue to work for the good of the land that we're in for the glory of God. And they didn't make it about how evil Babylon was. They made it about how good God is. And if you live your life like that and you don't get so stuck in hating better the things that you hate, but loving God more, you'll find yourself to be more patient, to be more kind. And you recognize that you were created to put on display and to declare with your mouth the glory, greatness, and goodness of God. You do that, your whole life has meaning. And then join a gospel community. Find yourself some friends. And you're like, man, it's going to be weird, and it absolutely will be. Because people are weird, and so are you. So it's okay. So show up. And one of the things that surprised me as an adult is that being the new adult feels a lot like being the new kid in a crowd where you're like, oh, it's still awkward. I thought I was over this part. It is. And then you make some small talk that leads into vulnerability, that leads into trust, that leads into praying for each other and standing up beside each other when things get hard. So join a community, get some friends, and then recognize that the only thing that saves you from those hard times is the presence of God. And you get some friends who can encourage you in that, who can just be with you through it. And you live a life that matters. So thank you for being a church that does this. I get to watch this all the time in this position. I get to watch, and there's still hurt that happens, but thanks for being a church that does stand beside each other when things get hard and lives a life that declares the greatness of God. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you were there for these three. This is not a fictional story. There was a real moment when you showed up for three men, and you put on display how great you really are. Do that in our lives. Give us the courage to stand up in those little moments and the big moments. And give us friends who we can stand with, that we don't have to compromise, but we can be vulnerable and trusting, that we can forgive and be forgiven. And thank you for this church as we stand beside each other. Let us put on display and to declare with our mouth your glory, greatness, and goodness today and every day. In your name we pray. Amen.